Sup guys? Bet you were expecting the heavy cruiser tier list today, so I had to switch it up to keep you on your toes. This is an important lesson to be on guard at all times. Now I honestly expected the first video to do pretty well, but then people to stop caring after, but apparently the second one did better than the first, so now I gotta keep making these. By the way, you should probably not post screenshots of these tier lists, not that I can stop you, but you're gonna be the one looking like an idiot posting a tier list with like Sakawa over Duka with no context. Oh right, I'm supposed to be talking about Battleships right now, so let's get back on track. Here is the most official Battleship tier list of all time. Right off the bat, being the mind reader that I am, I know you're wondering why there is an F tier with only champagne in it. Perhaps you think the F stands for French, but if you look at Richelieu and Gascon, that is clearly not the case. Now, just like light cruisers, I have a bone to pick with the Battleships. Let me play you these two clips side by side and let me know if you see the problem. Yes, that's right. It takes 3 whole seconds just for a battleship to aim and fire a shot. So, if I can get away with it, I will never use a battleship because I'm not a huge fan of wasting time. Just imagine doing a stronghold with champagne or UVH in your mob fleet. Having them fire like 6 times a fight over 20 or so fights, that's 5 minutes wasted. With that 5 minutes, I'm already halfway done an auto clear of 12-4. We are not the same. While we're on this topic, here's a mini episode of pointless min-maxing. If you're just farming something easy like event maps or 12-4, and the gun on your battleship doesn't change the outcome of the fight, then just use a +0 blue quad 356mm since it has the highest reload and will waste the least time with a stupid time freeze. On a side note, the Rainbow 460 can't even be the best at being the slowest. How pathetic. Anyways, since Champagne is the biggest offender of this with her preload and cooldown reduction, and the fact that UVH exists and is better than her in every way, I had to make an F tier just for her. At least her design is pretty good though. Alright, let's move on to some real ships now. Starting from the top, these are my wives. Next is the triple S tier. If you need me to explain why Musashi is here, you should probably be reading a guide and not watching my videos. I also put Vanguard up here because she's actually my favorite UR in the game. Other than that though, I do think she's a bit better than the ships in SS tier. If you keep a fleet the same but replace New Jersey with Vanguard, you'll generally see better results. The last ship in the SSS tier is Mikasa. Since Musashi is so good and she supercharges Musashi, she has to be good. Some may say that she's too squishy and her personal damage is too low, or that her proc rate is as consistent as Helena's radar scan. All of these problems fall under the category called skill issue. Now we move on to the SS tier. First is New Jersey. Although she had a good run as the best battleship in the game for over a year, her run was unfortunately stopped by Musashi. Well, Vanguard was better than her too, if you ask me, but you would always use the two together. Obviously, she hasn't gone any worse, and it's been hilarious to me seeing the people who dropped her as their waifu the moment Musashi came out. I will also mention that she's probably slightly overrated in campaign, as single target battleships are just not it. Next up is FDG, who is god tier in all campaign stages, whether it be in the mob or boss fleets. She's also pretty good in single enemy boss fights, but since her damage is super reliant on crits, her performance can vary significantly from battle to battle. After that is UVH, who has probably the most useful cross-fleet barrage in the game. She's also very good in campaign with her high uptime, particularly in the boss fleet, because she won't get the out of ammo debuff, and can help your mob fleet with interception through her cross-fleet barrage. The only issue is the one which I mentioned earlier with her wasting my time. And if you're one of those people who use UVH in their opsite mob fleet for fast clears, then I pity you. Now we're onto the S tier, where the SSR ships start coming in. The S tier is pretty much filled with ships that are best in their use case if we remove the rainbows out of the equation. Hood is easily the best flagship for just raw, consistent AoE damage. For more details, go watch this video. Brunhilde and Monarch both provide valuable slow support. Brunhilde does a ton of damage against light armor enemies and her slow is aimed and can be used off flag, while Monarch prefers medium and heavy enemies with an AoE flagship barrage. So choose one of them based on your needs. Next, Seydlitz has a preload and deals great damage even past it, but what makes her truly special is her damage absorb skill that makes her a game changer in chapter 14 bosses. If you use a full Ironblood main fleet with Seydlitz, you eliminate the chance of your main fleet ever dying in 14-4, and with choices like FDG, UVH, Odin, and Graf Zeppelin, you should have no issues finding a suitable main fleet to pair with her. Next, Vittorio Veneto and Richelieu deal a respectable amount of damage while buffing their nation's ships. The Italians and French are kind of lacking in super strong ships though at the moment, so they're not used as often, but with a UR event, both of them should return to form. Next is Nagato, who by herself isn't as good as Vivi and Richelieu, but her buff is bigger and she has better ships to buff. Duke of York was Vanguard before Vanguard, and although her role has been entirely taken by Vanguard, she herself has not gotten any worse in any way. Finally, Odin is a giant bag of useful gimmicks, making her a top tier option in later stages of campaign, especially in chapter 14 where she is one of the best options, period. At this point, I should address meta and collab ships. I don't really care for them, and although Naze and Sharn meta are pretty decent ships, there's no reason to use them over Odin, so I can't be bothered to put them in. Next up, we're in the A tier. Hao is a pretty simple ship with a decent buff, but the accuracy portion of it is hard to take advantage of, and she's mostly outdone by Brunhilde as a support option against light armored enemies. Gascogne is a very good mob fleet flagship, but faces strict competition from Hood and also does the stupid time freeze twice per reload. I absolutely do not want that in my mob fleet, so she gets placed in A. Bismarck is not as good as the other faction buffers and at times isn't even worth using in a full Ironblood fleet, so she also goes into A. Marco Polo has absolutely top tier damage against medium armor only, beating out pretty much all of S tier in that category, but being only good against medium is not enough for me to care too much about her. I'm also not a huge fan of her design, which is probably the real reason she's an A, but I'll leave that for you to decide. Prinz Ruprecht, if that's how you say her name, is a wannabe Odin who loses some of the gimmicks in exchange for stronger main guns. And her barrage on fire needs flagship and is pretty pathetic. She's by no means a bad ship, just like the rest of A tier, but if you need what she brings, Odin is generally better. After her Fate Sim next year, she'll probably be more useful. Amagi's damage isn't too impressive these days, but her defensive utility remains extremely useful even in chapter 14 and against the Battleship Arbiter. Repulse meta is quite good against light armor enemies, but doesn't offer much aside from her damage. She's a bit similar to Marco Polo in that regard, but her damage against light isn't as much above the competition as Marco's is against medium. Finally, Belarusia to me is a budget monarch. She seems good on paper, but her barrage hit rate is nowhere close to Monarch's, and you might find it useful that her slow reaches further back than Monarch's, but I don't really find it to be that big of a deal. And now we're on to the B tier, starting with Georgia. Between her barrage not proccing, or proccing and then whiffing altogether, as well as the fact that single target isn't good in campaign, but she was overrated for a long time in campaign due to people not really knowing how AA damage is calculated, I have a lingering negative impression of her. It's a shame since I really liked her design, but she needs at least 100% proc rate on her barrage before I give her another chance. Tosa is super hot and deals huge amounts of AoE against mobs when her barrage procs, but as the saying goes, if it's not 100% then it might as well be 0%. And finally, Little Renown is some esoteric knowledge that I'm not going to explain. Now I know I feature quite a bit of HMS ships on my channel, so I'm bound to get someone asking me about QE, but she would just end up in F tier for her design, so it's probably for the best that I left her out. Anyways, that's gonna be it for the Battleships tier list. Again, I'll be streaming on Thursday when the event drops, so I hope you can come by if you have time. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.